The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
This is the reading of the Holy Gospel according to Matthew.
Glory to you, Lord.
After Jesus had completed his conversation and teaching of the scribes and the Pharisees in the temple, the Pharisees went off and began to plot how they might trap Jesus in his speech. They sent their disciples to Jesus, accompanied by Herodian sympathizers, who said, "Teacher, we know you are a truthful man, and you teach God's way sincerely. You court no one's favor, and do not act out of human respect. So then, give us your opinion in this case. Is it lawful to pay tax to the emperor or not?" Jesus recognized their bad faith and said to them, "Why are you trying to trip me up? Hypocrites. Show me the coin used for the tax." When they handed him a small Roman coin, he asked, "Whose head is this, and whose inscription?" They replied, "Caesar's." At that, Jesus said to them, "Then give to Caesar what is Caesar's, but give to God what is God's." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
How many here are tired of watching the Royals win baseball games? Raise your hand. How many here are tired of watching advertisements of politicians attacking other politicians? Raise your hands. Quite a contrast. Today's gospel is a political attack ad in the making. And I wanted you to get that as the context for the message. When Jesus entered into Jerusalem, he did rather triumphantly with a whole host of followers that accompanied him from Upper Galilee and all the way down through to Jericho and into Jerusalem, and they tore off branches from trees, and they put them on the ground in front of him and put their robes on the ground, and Jesus was riding the donkey, and they were shouting, and they were singing, and they were praising, and they were making, more noise than Arrowhead. Amen? And that got the scribes and the Pharisees and all these religious leaders upset because they were treating Jesus like the Son of David, the Messiah, the Son of God, maybe. And so they tried to get Jesus to quiet his disciples. And he said to them in reply, "If they keep quiet, the very rocks will shout." Praise to God. And then he came into the temple and made a whip out of a rope and drove out all the animals and turned over the money changers' tables. Okay? And so then he had the priests upset and the economics of the temple in disarray, which is no small thing, either one. And then he had all these arguments with the scribes in the temple. And that's the setting for this scene. And it says that you had the Pharisees joining ranks with the Herodian sympathizers. Now, I will give a prize to the one who knows what a Herodian sympathizer is.
Herod's followers.
The what?
Herod's followers.
Herod's followers. And who was Herod?
King.
King. And who made him king? No. You don't get the prize. You were close. Sorry. I couldn't resist. Sorry. Really bad of me. That's pretty funny. Caesar Augustus made Herod a puppet king. Meanwhile, Pilate was governor, and he was the real power in Judea. Okay? So the Herodian sympathizers were those who were the followers, the sympathizers, the pals, the political allies of Herod, keeping him king, which means they were allied with Caesar and Rome and the tax. Okay? So here you have, and the Pharisees were just the opposite. They would just as soon we get all the Romans out of Palestine and get our country back. Amen? So they were the nationalist party. Okay? You know, here is more the Roman party. Here's the nationalist party. It's kind of like the distance between the Tea Party and Nancy Pelosi. Now imagine those two getting together. That's what happened here. They got together. Why is that? Well, they had a common enemy now. Jesus of Nazareth, who could not be politically bought. So their plan was to create a political attack ad. Okay? The attack ad would read something like this. Jesus of Nazareth, so-called prophet, so-called healer, so-called exorcist, so-called rabbi, so-called Messiah, is pro-tax to Caesar. To trash his reputation. That was the whole deal. That was the whole deal in a nutshell. And, you know, that's pretty thinly veiled. You know, even if you're not the Son of God, but of course Jesus was. And always recognize bad faith. Son of God. So he didn't bite on that. He kind of brushed it off, kind of like, you know, it's Caesar's head, it's Caesar's inscriptions. Give to Caesar what is Caesar's. You know, what's the big deal, in essence? Okay. But render to God what is God's. Now, you have to take that statement in the context as well, because the people he was talking to thought they knew what it was to render to God what is God. As a matter of fact, they had it down to an exact science, okay? You take all the laws in the Torah and you quantify them down to the lowest common denominator. What does it take to obey this law and this law and this law? And then where can we have loopholes for the laws? The Pharisees were very good at that. And if you keep reading in Matthew beyond this chapter, you'll see Jesus take them on with exactly that same thing. The way they were rendering to God what is God's was measuring it out, parsing it out, very stingy with God. Okay? Not generous. You're obeying the letter of the law that you have to obey. No more, no less. And that will keep you in God's grace. That will give you esteem in the marketplace and in the temple. Okay? Now, for those of us who are old enough and raised Catholic on the 1941 Baltimore Catechism, we may find a little similarity there between that approach to religion and an approach that measures out, this is what you have to do to obey this law, and this law, and this law, and here's the exceptions, here's the dispensations, here's the loopholes, okay? And how many days indulgence goes with this prayer? You remember those? How many remember indulgences attached to prayers? Okay. So we had kind of a quantifying way to look at grace and giving back to God what is God's. Okay. But when you look at gospel and when you look at Jesus, the measure of giving back to what is God, giving back to God what is God's, who is that measure? It is Jesus. There is no other measure but him. He is the measure. He is the visible, incarnate measure of rendering to God what is God's. So what do we do with that? What do we do with Jesus saying, render to God what is God's? What is God's in your life? What in your life that is in any way under your responsibility, what is God's? Your very body, your soul, your mind, your heart, your talents, what you've accomplished so far, what you hope to accomplish. Every relationship that you have. I think it was Thomas Aquinas who wrote, there is no way to take any good act, any form of goodness, and to separate out this much of that goodness is God's, and this much of that goodness is us. There's no way to separate that. No way to separate in anything that I say or do, or any relationship that I have that is of value, not just to me, it is just of value. To say, well, this much is coming from me, and this much is coming from God. No way to say that. No way to know it. No way to separate. Every good act we do. No way to separate out the grace, the gift, and the human. So it's really easier to point out what is not God's. How about sin? Amen? How about sin? Okay, that's not God. God didn't do that. Okay. What about anything that's good and wonderful and loving and just and kind and honest, decent, virtuous, worthy of praise? as Paul wrote in Philippians 4. That's all God's. And how do we give that to God? If God is giving that to us, if that's part of God's grace to us, we can't measure. That's the bottom line problem with quantitative religion, is that we cannot ever measure grace. Can't ever measure the grace. Beyond measure. Beyond measure. And so what is it to give that to God? God is giving it to us. And what is that to give that back to God? What I recommended to myself, which means I'm recommending it to you, is to try to keep that little sentence, or actually it's only half a sentence, give to God what is God's, or render to God what is God's. Just to keep that on the front burner this week. Keep that somewhere in your visual attention. Don't do anything different than you were going to do with your life this week. Don't change a plan. Don't change anything. Just be aware of giving to God what is God's. And everything you do, everything you say, every relationship that you will connect with this week, giving to God what is God's. I was going to make one final point. Maybe not, but I'm going to. I can shout louder. I have a bigger mouth. The best thing about giving to God what is God's is who benefits from that. Who benefits the most from your giving back to God what is God?
Yourself.
It's yourself. Here and now, it's yourself. Here and now, it's yourself. Everything you give back to God right now, today, you benefit from that. And tomorrow you'll benefit from that. And the day after, and the day after, and the rest of your life you'll benefit from that. And for eternity, you'll benefit from that. Build up for yourself treasure in heaven. Giving to God what is God's. And you have treasure. But I don't think you have to wait till you die. I think the treasure is here.